Hello, this is Ed Tyson from MMA Collector. Every week I will bring in a new piece of memorabilia from my personal collection and even bring in a few collector friends with some of theirs. Our goal is to raise awareness of MMA memorabilia collecting and discuss the historical people and fights that made this sport what it is today. Join me now while we take a stroll down memorabilia lane. Wanderlei Silva was one of Japan's biggest stars, as the Axe Murder always seemed to put on a spectacular performance. When he got to the UFC, Vanderlei Silva and the Wand brand were ready to hit the American market, but he started his career spelling his name Vanderlei. What's up with that?
Today on MMA Collector, we're going to look at a couple of Brazilian magazines that the Gracie's put out. It's called the Gracie Magazine. And I have a couple of questions for Miguel. To start with, I have the Gracie Magazine from April of 2001. It's the number 51 magazine, and it's got Vanderlei Silva on the cover, and his name is spelled with a V on this particular version of the magazine. And when I looked at the November issue in 2001, which would have been their number 58 issue, it's spelled with a W. So it went from Vanderlei to Wanderlei Silva in this Brazilian magazine that the Gracies put out. Miguel, what can you tell me about that?
Just a fascinating story Vanderlei has been through. I believe Vanderlei with a V is what appears on his birth certificate. Because if you look back at his first international appearances, that would be UFC Brazil in 1997. He fought Vitor Belfort. And if you look at that old video, very clearly his name is spelled with a V.
Yeah.
In the IVCs, which are a Brazilian show that obviously are legendary, and he fought in those, very clearly there, they identify him with a V. So as he was coming up, he was Vanderlei. Something happened now. Luca Atala is the publisher of that Gracie magazine, and he's always done an absolutely phenomenal job. He's also a guy that, it's Gracie magazine. He's been to Japan since the Hicks and Gracie days in the early 90s, 94 and that sort of stuff. So he was very well connected with the Japanese audiences and also, getting coverage from Japanese shows. 51, your first magazine there, has Vanderlei Silva. It's funny, I was reading it. It says Vanderlei atropella Sakuraba. And that literally is Vanderlei runs over Sakuraba. Like you get run over by a car or a truck. That's what that word is, atropella. So, and it's Vanderlei with a V. But Vanderlei's already in Japan. That's the fight that made him a superstar. When he wiped out Sakuraba that way, put an end to the Gracie killer, and stepped up for Brazil, Vanderlei exploded. And the Japanese are the people responsible for changing his name, because they were about to, he became their champion. They were going to market him, and they can't. The V sound is not a sound that appears in their language or their vocabulary much, and they changed it to a W, and ever since then he was Wanderlei. By 58, which you did a great job at picking the magazines, because 58 is the rematch with Vanderlei and Sakuraba. And here it says Vanderlei beats Sakuraba again, and that's and this time Wanderlei has been debuted here. Even in Brazil, they were going with the W there. So the Japanese did a very complete job of changing his name. I wonder if he actually went to court to get his name changed, like Marvelous Marvin Hagler. He got his name changed. But that's what happened with Vanderlei. He was selected and for superstardom, basically. And part of that, you got to give up something. And he gave up his name.
So what do you think? Answer me this. The Gracies were kind of dominated by Sakuraba, right? It seems that way. We're calling him the Gracie killer, this and that. Now, this is their magazine. They must have been pretty happy to have Vanderlei Silva on the cover after he had beat him twice. So do you think that was kind of like something that they felt good about, putting him on their own magazine, that they put their name on, that here, this guy took care of him?
I think that's the case. I think Luca, the publisher of the magazine, was a lifelong, student of the Gracies, a black belt, and also as the magazine as his business, and he cared for the legacy of the Gracies. But once you get to Japan and you hear most of the Gracies talk about it, Vanderlei was not a Gracie at all. He was a Muay Thai guy from the South, very different. But once he got to Japan, hey, it's another guy that speaks Portuguese. It's another guy who's going through the same things you're going. And they grew a camaraderie. And I think Vanderlei was one of the first crossover guys, and the guys that everybody knew in the fight game who wasn't a Gracie. And I think that, I think it is a sign of respect, and that the Brazilian scene had grown, that they were giving them coverage like that. So I think it's a nice find there in the collection, and a nice note there. Where you read this? Do you read Portuguese there? And are you just thumbing through your collection like
Yeah, I can't read any Portuguese, but I can look at pictures, just like, back in the old days when we started looking at Playboy magazines before we could read. We could look at the pictures, but we couldn't read the articles.
Yeah, and same thing with the magazines, and the Japanese magazines. I might add here, as we wrap up, that the collection has an extensive collection of magazines from Japan and Brazil and the United States and all over the place. And this spot here lets us tell a little bit of history there with the evolution of Vanderlei's name. So definitely a great spot, Ed. Thank you.
All right.
So one of the bigwigs in Pride decided that Vanderlei Silva had to undergo a name change in order to break into the Japanese market. Who can blame Vanderlei for going along with it? After all, he got paid, and the Japanese have done this on several occasions. The most famous being the case of Mirko Filipovic, the Croatian kickboxer they redubbed Mirko Cro Cop. Cro being Croatia, and Cop because he was a police officer. They just couldn't handle Filipovic either. But lo and behold, they turned him into a star too. They also did it to one of their own, as Karo Uno, the rising shooter star, at some point became Kaoru Uno. But why would they change a Japanese fighter's name? That one we're not sure about. But in the case of both Vanderlei Silva and Mirko Cro Cop, the move proved to be a star maker. Next episode, we bring the no-holds-barred history as we look at items from the collection of UFC co-founder Art Davie. Take a moment to like and share, and subscribe to the MMA Collector on YouTube and join our collector community.